Chapter 21. Painting Disappointment. I know he loves me, but this pain is mine. It's mine to keep, mine to bear. If I cannot bear his children, at least I can bear the brief memories of their existence, their time inside of me. They are the faces I see on the canvas. Chris doesn't understand why I paint. It's to remember them, how they would have been, how they come to me in dreams. I will never get to hold them, never hear them say they love me or watch them grow up. The paintings are all I have of them. Carrie's journal. It was her weeping that woke him, muffled sobs in the dark. Chris fumbled for a candle and matches. Back at the main house, there were solar panels and a bloom box, signs that the reformation was slowly trickling into the backwater towns. As the town doctor, Liza had qualified for the latest in gadgets that were making their way from the East Coast, but here in the old homestead, they were roughing it. The simple 4-room stone structure had been steadily rebuilt over the past 5 years. After Liza and Carl had married and began having babies, it was easier on all involved for Carrie and Chris to make the old homestead their home. After all, they didn't need as much room. In all, they had suffered 4 late-term miscarriages and countless others earlier on. It had left Carrie devastated, and she grew thinner and frailer with each failed pregnancy. Liza and Carl's 2 oldest children, Molly Ann and John Fenton, absolutely adored their Auntie Carrie, which made seeing them even harder on her. Chris could see it in the tight line of a smile and stiffness in her shoulders, even as she opened her arms and let them barrel into her. How she wanted just one to call her own. She hadn't argued at all when Chris first suggested rebuilding the old homestead in the woods. It had been Fenton's childhood home. The old man had looked positively touched when Chris first asked him for permission to rebuild, and eventually add on to the crumbling ruin. The plan had been simple. Just 1 bedroom, a kitchen, bathroom, and living dining area. It followed the original plan of the building and included a loft, which had been semi-private, open to the living room below. The loft area had been Fenton's, but now it was a place for Carrie to write and paint in. A large bank of windows, different from the original design of the house, allowed plenty of natural light in. She had taken up the writing and painting after her 2nd miscarriage 9 years ago. It seemed to help distract her and ease the pain and loss. Chris fumbled over the matches and struck one, lighting the lantern by the bed. "Baby, you okay?" His voice cracked and his eyes were still encrusted with sleep. Outside, the darkness was absolute. He picked up the lantern and headed for the tiny bathroom. Inside it, Carrie had pulled off her nightgown and a large blotch of red stained it. "Oh, Carrie, Carrie's voice was strained. "Please don't say it, Chris. Don't say anything, okay?" Chris reached out a hand to her. "Carrie, She pulled away. "I have to clean up. Just please go back to bed. I'll be fine. I just need to be alone, okay?" With each loss, the gulf between them seemed to widen. She kept the pain close to her, embraced it like a friend, and pushed away Chris, Liza, and anyone else who cared. Chris didn't know if she was trying to spare them from it, or if retreat was just a coping mechanism, but each time his own misery grew. How much more of this could their relationship take? This terrible feeling that they were growing apart, isolated from each other, lost in their own private pain? Chris retreated back to bed. She hadn't even told him this time. And how long had she been pregnant this time? A few weeks? A month? With Fenton's passing and Liza's new baby on the way, work on the farm was busier than ever. Usually he tried to pay attention, to know, so that he could be some kind of support for her, but he had been so busy. The lantern light was blown out, and he heard Carrie navigate her way back to the bedroom. She moved silently across the floor. Only 1 or 2 creaks gave her position away, and then she was sliding into bed beside him. "How long?" he asked her. 2 months, 6 days, she replied, and her voice sounded hollow. "I didn't want to get your hopes up." Chris closed his eyes in pain and guilt. He hadn't noticed at all. 2 months, and I didn't even notice. "Sweetheart, he began. "Please, Chris," she cut him off. "I'm just really tired right now." He pulled her close to him. She stiffened at first, sighed, and let him pull her against him. They lay there, unmoving, for a long time before either could sleep again. The next day dawned, sun bright over the tips of the trees and the warmth of the early summer sun already warming the tiny homestead. Chris awoke with a start, realizing he had slept late, later than he had in a long time. He could smell hot chicory percolating on the stove and quickly dressed. Usually, he was the one who rose first. After splashing some cold water on his face, he walked into the kitchen, poured himself a large mug of the brew, walked into the living room and looked up. Sure enough, there she was, sketching away. She usually threw herself into a new project or series right after a miscarriage. He could see her now, intent on sketching out the details on the canvas, which she would then fill in with the paints she made from plant extracts. "I'll have to let Liza know," he thought. "Have her check in and see if Carrie needs any extra iron supplements, and also to keep the kids away for a week or so." He knew he would also have to push Carrie to stop working, to eat something, and even to come to bed. The painting would consume her. It was her escape, but it came with a price. She had broken her ankle shortly after her 4th late-term miscarriage. She had gone into labor at just 22 weeks and given birth to a stillborn baby boy. That had been almost 3 years ago. By that time, Chris had finished the loft and moved Carrie's painting supplies in there. She had gotten out of bed way too soon, insisting she was fine, climbed up into the loft and began painting with single-minded intensity. The 3rd day of painting, with little food and even less sleep, she had tried to climb down the ladder, slipped and fallen, breaking her left ankle. Since then, Chris kept a sharp eye on her, which caused friction between them and insisted she regularly stop for meals and rest. "Morning, sweetheart," Chris called. "Ready for some breakfast?" "I'm not hungry." Carrie didn't look up from her sketch. Her eyes were red-rimmed and drawn tight with exhaustion. He wondered how long she had waited before slipping back out of bed and climbing up the ladder to the loft. Probably not long. Chris tried again. "I could make you something simple, an egg, or—" Carrie flushed with anger. She was right on the edge. "Chris, leave it be." He took a deep breath and fought the desire to argue with her. He had half a mind to go up and drag her down from the loft by force, but he couldn't bear an argument right now. Better to go talk to Liza and see what she had to say. He knew his sister-in-law would shake her head and beg Chris to try to convince Carrie to stop trying. The last miscarriage just 7 months ago had shaken them all. She had lost a great deal of blood, collapsed, and Liza had feared for her sister like never before. Between that and Fenton's slowly succumbing to heart disease, It had been an incredibly difficult year for everyone, and Liza didn't need any stress either. Carl had quietly pointed that out to Chris the other day. After all, she was in her final trimester, and they were expecting the baby to come any day. With one last look at Carrie, who sat less than 10 feet from him sketching with an intensity he admired and hated at the same time, Chris left the tiny homestead and headed for the main house.